You are listening to the Billy Dees Podcast.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. As always, I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. If this is your first time here, we are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast. Today, we have an interview for you, and I'm very pleased to present Zolal Habibi. Zolal, so glad you are here. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. And I'd like to greet the audience, those who are tuning in. It's a pleasure to be with you.
That's fantastic. Let me tell you a little bit about Zolal. Zolal Habibi is an Iranian human rights activist and a prominent voice for justice, democracy, and women's rights in Iran. She serves on the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, which is the NCRI, where she advocates globally for a free, secular, and democratic Iran. With over 2 decades of dedicated activism, she has become a fierce advocate on behalf of the voiceless inside Iran, regularly appearing on international forums, human rights conferences, and live broadcasts across major media platforms. Zolal's activism began in her teens, profoundly shaped by the loss of her father, a respected Iranian writer and political dissident who was killed by the regime during the 1988 massacre. This personal tragedy ignited a lifelong commitment to ensuring that no other family suffers such a loss and that the voices of Iran's political prisoners, dissidents, and freedom seekers are heard on the world stage. Her work has directly contributed to securing international recognition of the 1988 massacre as a crime against humanity and the safe relocation of 3,000 at-risk dissidents from Iraq, demonstrating her ability to translate advocacy into tangible and life-saving outcomes. That's a pretty impressive resume. Again, it's an honor to have you on the program. Thank you so much. I think most Americans, especially my age, are familiar with Iran, starting with the Ayatollah and what happened in the 1979 hostage crisis. That's probably what most people go to in America when they think about Iran and the times that followed that. A lot of people are not aware of what Iran was like prior to that. And it was actually fairly progressive by most people's standards prior to that. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about what life in Iran was like that some Americans may not be familiar with?
Well, actually, I think it's a good question to ask because there is a lot of misperceptions on that too. The reality is that the people of Iran had a revolution for a reason. Unfortunately, even before the 1979 revolution, we had a dictatorship, the monarchy, the Shah and his one-party rule and his Savak, which was a brutal force. There was torture, execution. There was a lot of poverty in Iran at that time. And there was a lot of difference between the classes. I mean, right now you see images of Iran and they say, look, people had the freedom to dress the way they wanted, but no one points out to the shanty towns and the fact that, so many people were killed by the Savak and the suppressive forces, the eternal guards and whatnot that the Shah had. But the reality is that, unfortunately, when you look at the amnesty report from 1976, 1977, and then you also look at the amnesty reports from 2025, you see in both Iran is the number one state in executions and in torture. So unfortunately, we went from one dictator to another form of dictatorship. Unfortunately, the present dictatorship was far worse because it's a theocracy. So it's a dictatorship that has an ideology behind it. So it's much more complex and much more brutal. But it doesn't whitewash the crimes committed and perpetrated by the Shah. And so the reality is we need to understand that the people revolted for a reason, but unfortunately their revolution was hijacked and was stolen. One of the reasons is because, unfortunately, till the last days, those who had actually created the revolution were still in prison. Actually, tomorrow, I'm not sure when this is being broadcast, but on January 20th is the anniversary of the release of the last set of political prisoners during the Shah's time. So the Shah escaped Iran on January 16th. 4 days later, the people freed the last set of political prisoners who were in prisons. And unfortunately, February 1st, Khomeini arrived.
Yeah.
And so the reality was, unfortunately, those who had actually paved the way for this revolution, who had paid the price, who had been executed, killed, tortured, the revolution was stolen right from them, who had actually dedicated their lives to bring freedom to Iran. And unfortunately, at that time, it was the Cold War era. So the West figured at that point, some Western countries, that it would be to their benefit, now that the Shah has to go, it would be to their benefit to bring Khomeini, who was like a religious figure, because Iran was bordering the USSR, and they thought that it would be to their benefit to have someone like that in power. Unfortunately, the Iranian people have paid the price for that since then, and we saw the growth of Islamic fundamentalism and the terrorism of the regime since that day. So unfortunately, the revolution of the people was hijacked. This is not what we had revolted for. They had revolted for, to have a democratic republic, but they didn't. Unfortunately, people knew what they didn't want. They didn't know what their choices necessarily were. And Khomeini, he played that card that, I'm an elderly man. When I go to Iran, I'm just going to go to Qom and continue my studies, religious studies, and I don't have anything to do with politics. But the day he came into power, he started his reign of terror on Iran.
Yeah. A lot of people don't understand, a lot of people that I've talked to, I know that the pictures of the Western culture during the 1970s are often touted as, look how great this was. But the Shah had issues as well. And it was one of the reasons why the animosity towards the United States leading up to the Ayatollah's takeover did not help. I mean, America was considered a friend of the Shah and Carter at the time. And that didn't play into the United States' favor as that unfolded as well. So I just, if you have any comment on that, you can. But I mean, I just wanted to make sure the audience was aware of that, because a lot of people don't quite understand that.
Yeah, the thing is that if you go back in the last 100 years of Iran, unfortunately, Reza Pahlavi was brought in, Reza Shah, he was brought in by the British, and then he was taken out. And then the US and the UK brought in Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, and then he was taken out. And then we had Khomeini, which was brought in by the West too. The reality is the only democratic government that very short period of time the Iranian people have experienced was when Dr. Mossadegh was the prime minister. So that was very short-lived, and unfortunately there was the 1953 coup d'etat, because Dr. Mossadegh was nationalizing Iran's oil, and that was not to the benefit of some of the Western powers. So unfortunately, that is why Iranians are so hesitant when it comes to the issue of foreign intervention, because Iran is a rich country in natural resources. Unfortunately, it has been misused in that regard. And so that's why people have that concern. And that is why it's so important for Iranians to be able to take their destiny into their own hands for once, and to be able to create the change that they want to see.
Yes. I know that you're advocating for a secular democracy. And I have this question. This is kind of my own personal question. The United States has, Winston Churchill once said about democracy that it's the absolute worst form of government except all of the rest. And I think as Americans, we kind of forget that. We go into places, we kick in the door, and we say, hey, we got this democracy here for you. Isn't it great? And the fact of the matter is, it's the least of the evils, and it isn't the best for everyone. And a lot of times when we kick in the door in these countries and go in and say, hey, this is democracy, how come you don't love it? They don't realize there's a lot of other things going on. We compare ourselves, our revolution, to Britain, which culturally we were very much alike. We're still very much alike. When we go as a Western country, go into some of these areas throughout the Middle East, there's a lot of other components there. How do you feel that, I mean, I know you're a pro-democracy person, but that region in general, culturally, a lot of folks that live in that region really cannot separate their religion from their government, which here in the United States, we always talk about separation of church and state. Do you feel that there's forces there that would make that difficult culturally and otherwise for you to accomplish your goal?
I think that the issue is not democracy. I think that, I mean, human beings, no matter from what kind of background you have or what, you know, what religion you come from or what your ethnicity is, that is something that it's part of human nature, that it seeks democracy and freedom. I think that it's only the issue of how it is coming about that makes the difference. Okay. People feel like something is being pushed on them, they're going to have a reaction, or like when they think there's foreign interest behind it or something, you know, those come into play. But the reality is that for Iran, I do think we have a very rich culture and history. For thousands and thousands of years, Iranians from different ethnicities and from different religions have been living side by side together. So that's not an issue in our country, really. It has never been. The reality is that we believe that we need to have a secular democratic republic in Iran. So separation of religion and state, I think, is key, because religion is supposed to be a personal choice for people. It should never be a part of the government, even if people might have those personal values and principles that it's derived from their beliefs. But that's what it is. That's the extent of it. It shouldn't have a role in the government. And that's why we advocate for a secular democratic republic, despite being, like, for instance, despite being a Muslim force. Like, for instance, the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, it's a Muslim force, but they are the first to say, we believe that there needs to be a secular government, because no one should have that power over anyone else to be able to dictate to them what to do or what not to do in their personal beliefs. And in fact, it's very interesting, actually. 4 days after the head of the MEK, Mr. Masoud Rajavi, he was released from prison back in 1979. He was released on January 20th, 1979. 4 days later was his first speech. And there he says, long live the democratic revolution of Iran. He doesn't say the Islamic revolution of Iran, because that's not what they stood for. They said, no, we didn't revolt for Islam. We revolted for freedom. We revolted for people of Iran to be free. And that was when Khomeini knew that, you know, the falling out with Khomeini, because he was like, you know, these people are not going to accept my rule. And he realized that very quickly. So I think one of the things that the National Council of Resistance of Iran actually promotes is a secular democratic republic. We think that first and foremost, it's really important to have people's sovereignty. And this is also outlined in the 10-point plan presented by Mrs. Rajavi. She's the president-elect of the Iranian resistance for the interim government. A 6-month interim government after the fall of the regime is what the NCRI proposes. and then there is going to be a council to put together the new constitution, and then there will be free elections under the guise of the international community, the United Nations. So one of the things that you see in the 10-point plan is the first point is, as I said, people's sovereignty. The ballot box is the final criterion. And then you see, like, for instance, that every human being's rights are the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of association. All of these rights need to be recognized and safeguarded. And then you see the abolition of the death penalty and executions in Iran, and the formation of an independent judiciary system, the separation of religion and state, equality between men and women, and actually women's empowerment, and all divisions, to have a free market economy and equal opportunities for everyone, removal of all the unfortunate, the double standards and everything that a lot of ethnicities in Iran suffer from, and, recognizing the autonomy of, like, for instance, different ethnicities in Iran under the entire, protecting the entirety of Iran. And like in non-nuclear Iran, Iran which is in coexistence and peace with its neighbors, and a unifying force and a force for stability in the region, and not destabilizing force as it is right now. And right now, it's unfortunately the number one state sponsor of terrorism. So, I mean, the points when you go through the 10-point plan, it's really a roadmap that can lead you in the right direction. And it has been called by many lawmakers Jeffersonian, or there are over 5,000 parliamentarians around the world who have voiced their support for this plan. And also over like 130 former heads of state have supported it. So it's something that has been presented for 20 years now, and this resistance has showed step by step that this is what they stand for, and they have, withstood the test of time in the last 44 years that the National Council of Resistance of Iran has been formed. I think it's really interesting to see how this council, which is about 500 members, you see people from all walks of life in it. So you see people from different ethnicities, from different religious minorities. You see the presence of, atheists. You see the presence of, Christians, Jews, everyone coming together, Zoroastrians. And I think that's really important. And the fact that 52% of the parliament in exile are women. And that is why we say women are the force for change in Iran. And that's what we are also seeing on the streets, on the ground. And this is a path that Mrs. Rajavi has set really in this movement. She has created like a whole generation of capable female leaders. And you're seeing how that's being replicated throughout Iranian society right now. Yeah.
The person you're speaking of is, I hope I'm saying this correctly, Maryam Rajavi. And as a matter of fact, you have a hashtag that says, I stand with Maryam, and it's Maryam, not Mary Ann, Rajavi. What I find interesting is the women in this whole thing seem to, and I'm not saying anything negative against the men, but it seems like the women are the ones who are the fighters. It seems like they are the ones. We see the pictures of them, lighting cigarettes with the Ayatollah's picture burning. And I don't see men that far out in front of it. Is it something? I would have to say that the breed of feminist, if that's an appropriate word, with what you guys are doing, is a lot more impressive than what the term means here in Western culture. You guys are the real deal. What is it about women?
Well, I think that this is actually a very interesting topic, and this is something that I have a lot of ambition to speak about because it's something that I have drawn a lot of my inspiration from throughout the years, and actually even coming into the resistance and choosing this path. The reality is that, unfortunately, we're dealing with a misogynist regime in Iran. So systematically, to be able to control society, Khomeini understood that if he's able to control half of society, then he can enter the most personal aspect of people's lives and to be able to control all of society. So that was suppression of women. With the mandatory veil, which was, just a few months after the revolution. And in fact, what's a very interesting fact is that the women who actually had the scarves by choice, they were the ones who were in the front lines protecting the women who didn't have a scarf when they were protesting. And actually the MEK was the first group to actually give a statement against the compulsory veil, because in their statements they say, even in Islam, it says there's no force in religion, there's no compulsion in religion, so you can't do this to people. So in fact, because it went against everything that they believed in, they were the ones who stood against this. So systematically, women have been suppressed. But on the other hand, we have seen women have been in this fight shoulder to shoulder with the men throughout these 47 years. And despite having to overcome a lot more obstacles in the path, because it's not only the political aspect, but also the social aspect. Like, for instance, a lot of conservative families, they weren't really open to the fact for their daughters to join a resistance movement that God knows what's going to happen to her. She's going to be underground, fighting the regime or whatnot. It wasn't what they had in mind for their daughters. So they had to overcome that obstacle at home, and then also in society, and then also in fighting the regime. But we saw that they were doing that. And in fact, what was seen in the prison, especially in the 1980s, was that women were showing a greater resistance and resilience in face of the torture that they were facing, despite the fact that the tortures that they were facing was far more severe in a lot of cases. I mean, first of all, just using, gender as a weapon against them, with rape, with everything that the regime would do to them, but they still stood steadfast. So back then, the MEK used to do an annual analysis of how far the resistance is coming, what they're doing, they would have a full analysis. And they realized in 1985 that these women are really phenomenal in their fight, but they're not being represented in the leadership positions. And so they realize that this is the effects of, that male mindset and, that misogynist views that at the end of the day still exist in society. So they decided to counter that. And they chose to make the leadership of the movement co-leadership, to have women and men both represented. And then from that started a whole movement, which was led by Mrs. Rajavi. So she was the one who was chosen as co-leader, but she didn't stop there. She didn't want to be, because she didn't believe in being just like the one superstar here. She believes to this day that women have so much potential to give, that she has taken one by one people's hands and just helped them grow. And she has created like a whole generation of capable leaders within the Iranian resistance who have really surpassed tests that are unbelievable throughout these decades. And so one after another, she broke all these glass ceilings that existed. But in this path, this isn't only about women. We see the emancipation of both women and men in this whole process. Sure. So it's not like the men are becoming passive. The men are taking up more responsibility that they used to, but with a much more, with much more energy and a lot more freedom, and because they have also broken those lenses that they had and how they viewed women and how they viewed, their capabilities and whatnot. So they're breaking all of those roles that have been created, unfortunately, in society, gender roles. They're breaking that and putting that aside and just seeing everyone as a human being. That is emancipating for everyone. It breaks off a lot of those shackles that, we drag with us in society. And I mean, like I remember when I was 12, the entire leadership council of the MEK turned to a all-female leadership council. And I remember thinking that there isn't anything that I can't do. And I grew up with that understanding. I remember in school, like a lot of girls used to be, I grew up in the US. So, in school, I saw a lot of people like my age who they actually saw barriers. Like they're like, women can't do that, or women can't do this. Unfortunately, in the US, we still have not seen a female president. This exists in the minds. And I never had any of those because I had seen these brave women being able to do everything and anything they put their mind to. Mrs. Rajavi has a slogan. She says, "We can and we must."
Yes.
Just the issue of making that choice and putting that responsibility on your shoulder and moving forward. And I think that has resonated to a great extent with the women in Iran. I think that when you are living under that tyranny, knowing that there is a complete other world available that you can, reach out to, that's really inspiring. And Ms. Rajavi always says, this is like a spring. The more pressure that you put on a spring, when you take that pressure off, the more potential there is for it to jump. And that is what we're seeing in the women of Iran. We also see the bravery of the men. So it's not an issue of in fact, it's not, we try to clarify that it's not feminism. It's actually gender equality at its finest. That I think that's really important, especially if you want to be able to build a society. You can't, you have to put aside the male domination, but you have to understand that women and men are equals, and you might need to have equity for a time to be able to break those, gender roles and those ideas that you have and those lenses that are in society. So you might need to create equity, but it is on the path for equality, and I think that's really important.
Yes. What's happening there right now? Just briefly, obviously, the reports range from hundreds to potentially thousands of deaths. The crackdown seems to be, very severe. That's I'm going to ask you a two-part question. The first part is, how bad is it there right now?
Well, right now it's day 21 of the uprisings. But it's also day 12 of the internet shutdown. And so for the last 12 days, it is very difficult to be able to get news out of Iran. We do get some, but it's very trickled, especially in the last 3-4 days that some phone lines have been connected. So we are getting something out, but the phone calls are very short, like 1 to 3 minutes, and it's very limited and it's being controlled. So it is very limited information that's getting out. But what's important to note is that the message that we are getting from on the ground from people is we haven't given up and we haven't stopped. It's still continuing. It might not be in the form of like a large demonstration with like hundreds and thousands of people on the street, but there are a lot of, there's a lot of like different protests, or also there's a lot of clashes right now in different areas of Iran over this issue. People are turning every opportunity to turn it into a demonstration, like, for instance, right now with the funerals that are being held for those who have been killed. Unfortunately, based on the numbers that we have been able to obtain and verify, over 3,000 people have been killed. The number, as I said, because of the internet disconnect, it's very limited and it needs time to be able to verify the actual numbers. But over 50,000 people have been arrested, and the situation is very severe and critical. We just had, like, for instance, news from doctors and hospitals that, first of all, the regime is raiding hospitals, identifying people who have been wounded to have them either arrested or killed on the scene. But one of the other things that they're doing is they have now collected all of the blood banks in the hospitals, and they have forbidden anyone to donate blood, so that way those who are wounded could suffer to death. So this is the regime that we're dealing with. Unfortunately, right now we are seeing the images and videos of the morgues and the fact that the regime is just lying the bodies on the ground for their families to come and identify them, and then charging them with the cost of the bullets. This is all part of the psychological torture and also to spread fear in society. But this is something that's not new. This regime, actually, there's so many parallels to what it used to do in the 1980s right now that it's devastating for me. But the only difference is back then no one heard about it, but now it's being documented because we are in the age of technology right now. So the reality is that the protest actually extended to over 220 cities in Iran, all 31 provinces. I think one of the main characteristics of this wave of uprisings was the rebellious youth that we saw on the streets and the resistance units who really, you saw the organized nature in a lot of the protest and how they were coming together, how they were supporting one another, and how they were moving forward. And especially, like, for instance, them going on the offensive, disarming the suppressive forces, protecting one another. If the regime was arresting people, they would attack and have those who were arrested released, things of that nature. And that is what the regime fears the most, because the regime knows that a society that has nothing to fear anymore is very dangerous for its existence. And what we're seeing on the ground, people, like a lot of people, when they went to the protests, they actually would send their final farewell messages to their families, and they would tell them, I know the risks of going to the streets, but I'm going anyways, because no one's going to hand us freedom in a silver platter. We have to pay that price ourselves. And we have to make sure that this time we continue till the end. And that is the message of the families right now. They're like, we're not going to allow our children's lives to have been lost in vain. We have to make sure that this time around we push all the way through to overthrow this regime, because really what we have now is not life. We're alive, but this is not living, and we need to see change. And they want to take their destiny into their own hands, especially the Gen Z of Iran today. Their main message is, we want to move forward in the 21st century. We're not stuck in choosing between bad and worse. We don't have to choose between the current dictatorship and the previous. We want to move forward to a democratic republic, a secular state that we can create our own future and the Iran that we want to see. Because unfortunately right now, Iran has the highest brain drain in the world. So really, we have a lot of assets, both natural resources and our people, but unfortunately they can't serve their own country right now because of the regime in power. And so that is why they're on the streets. And I think their resilience right now and their steadfastness in their fight, that is something that's very unprecedented, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Here is the $1 million question. Here's the big one. My dad was he passed away many years ago, veteran in some bad situations, and I grew up in the wake of Vietnam, and his philosophy was, if the United States was going to help, quote unquote, help another country with military force, you had to do three rules. One, clearly identify what your objective is. Two, go in with an overwhelming force. And three, get out. And that's the one we have trouble with. We have a tendency to kind of stay. I see a lot of Iranians on X, on the former Twitter, saying, wanting Trump to take some sort of an action. I know that, you've stated that this has to be organic, this has to be something that the people want. Now, this window has opened at various times. It opened in 2009, I believe Obama at the time, and it closed relatively quickly. So these windows are open for a short period of time, and then they have a tendency to close because people need medicine, they need this and that, and they can only go so long with a crackdown of this kind. So my question is do you want the United States to take some sort of action to weaken the current regime?
I think that what the people of Iran want is, it's not necessarily that we want troops on the ground or anything like that. Iran, you have to understand Iran's geography, its role in the geopolitics of the region. It's not a country that you can enter with troops on the ground and do something. Right. It's 3 times the size of Iraq and 4 times the population. It's very different. Historically even. Yeah. And also the terrain, everything, it's very different. What the Iranian people are asking for is like a firm policy on Iran. Mm-hmm. First of all, there's a lot of things that the international community can do to actually help. It doesn't necessarily mean military. Look, for one thing, I think the international community could easily reconnect the communication breakdown right now, if they want to. Second, the Iranian people are calling for the international community to hold Iran accountable for its crimes against humanity and war crimes right now, because that would tie the regime's hands in the crimes that it's perpetrating right now. Just to give you an example, I know the regimes are different, the nature is a bit different, but for instance, President Carter told the Shah, you have to stop execution and torture. Well, when he did, 18 months later, the Shah was not there anymore because people knew that you might get killed in the streets when you go to the protest. Just in one day on September 8th, he had 1,000 people killed in just one square in Tehran. But they knew if you're arrested, nothing's going to happen to you at the end of the day. And so people were willing to take that risk. So if the regime is held accountable, it'll tie its hands in these crimes that it's perpetrating. But on the other hand, for instance, in Europe and the UK, Iranians and actually members of the European Parliament and members of the British Parliament are asking for the blacklisting of the IRGC. Unfortunately, it's not happening. Ms. Metsola, actually, she has given a few statements in the past few days in this regard, and she's now calling out the countries. She's like, look, these 3 countries are preventing this from taking place. So what is that message to the Iranian regime? It's a green light. Okay, you can continue killing. We will give messages of condemnation. We'll allow people to protest on the streets in our country, but you're fine. You can continue. That is the message. When you see, today, the World Economic Forum had actually invited Araghchi to come and speak, despite what is happening right now in Iran. If it wasn't the international reaction of Iranians, he would have spoken there today. Last minute, today, actually this afternoon, it was canceled. And that was only because of the reaction of the Iranian people, not because the World Economic Forum thought that, hey, look, these are war criminals right now, and they're killing their people, massacring people right now on the streets. So those all give a green light to the regime. Or for instance, a lot of countries, they know that material that they're selling to Iran is going to be used for suppression, but they still do it. Where is Iran getting all of this technology, the AI technology for face recognition, for, being able to control, society? Where is it getting all these cranes that they're using for the executions? 2,200 executions in 2025. And just from January 5th to January 15th, we have 127 execution recorded. And this is at a time that half of it, we didn't have internet connection. So maybe the number's higher and we don't have the information yet. So, these are green lights to the regime that I can continue and no one's going to care. They might give words of condemnation. It doesn't mean that they actually want to see me gone. And that is the message that Khamenei is getting. So that's why people keep on saying, do something to give that message to the Iranian regime that you can't continue this way. It's not going to happen. On the other hand, I think it's really important right now to recognize the Iranian people's right to resist.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are saying, peaceful protesters up against the regime. This is a war. It's not a war because one side is with empty hands in the street and the other one is, is armed to the teeth. But
sure. So
this isn't fair. Yes, people are disarming the suppressive forces and everything, but, they need to know that the world is not going to call them terrorists tomorrow for defending themselves. And allow the regime to crack down on them. Right now, the judiciary of Iran has said that we are they're handing down death sentences right now, one after another, on the charge of muharebe, which means waging war on God or whatever. They're legitimizing it by saying that you fight terrorism, we're fighting terrorism too. Mm-hmm. So if the international community comes and says, yes, in the Declaration of Human Rights, this is a right to resist against tyranny. This is in the U.S. Constitution. It's in the French Constitution. It needs to be recognized for the Iranian people too. And I think those are the strongest steps that we can take to actually make sure that the people are able to overthrow this regime. Because also you have to understand, the minute that there is foreign intervention, it becomes like a war zone. So people have to go actually underground, right? People need to protect themselves. Then they're not going to be on the streets anymore. So they're not protesting the regime. So the regime is not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And realistically, if we look at it, even from the tactical perspective, foreign intervention is not the answer. The answer is supporting the Iranian people and their organized resistance.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting troops on the ground. I think that history has shown sanctions and economic sanctions, embargoes, these other things very seldom have an impact. And I'm not just talking about Iran, but in any country that we've dealt with. A lot of times with these regimes, what resources are being held back, the top people take, and all the people on the bottom, the very people that you're trying to help, are the ones that suffer. I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to some strategic airstrikes if it came down to doing something with pinpointing some areas that would weaken the regime. But I do agree that any type of foreign intervention comes with a lot of problems. I know the surrounding communities there, surrounding countries, and Saudi and some others probably wouldn't be too happy about it. They're afraid that it's going to upset the economy of the entire region and things like that. But here again, I'm kind of moved by the fact that it seems like these opportunities come along generationally, that they don't come along every week. And we have an opportunity here to, give the people of Iran a chance to do something for themselves, to make their lives better. And I hope that we do the right thing. I hope we don't let this opportunity pass without taking action. That's my opinion.
Well, I agree that it is a very critical time, and it's not something that happens every day. It's something that happens like maybe once a generation. Or even more than that. I do think that a lot of countries in the region are afraid of Iran's reaction or retaliation. And so that is why you see a lot of silence. But I also think that we have to understand that at the end of the day, it's the Iranian people who will be able to overthrow the regime. So that is what needs to be concentrated on. And I think that the fact that we do have a organized resistance, that is really a key factor. And the fact that, the Iranian people and this organization, this resistance, has stated time and time again that we do have the potential to create it. And the reality is that they have proven it in different times, that they have that. There's always been certain obstacles that have been put in front of them. So right now, what we're asking is, please don't create obstacles in our path. We'll take care of the rest of it. Just, that's, I think, the key element here. And I think that, the strategy on the ground that we are seeing, and that is what has caught everyone's eye in the scenes, is the strategy of like the resistance units and how they've been able to work and how they've been able to spread and how they've been able to organize across the country. The Iranian regime has time and time again, because there have been these points, as you said. I remember in December 2009, there was an uprising. It was during a religious ceremony. Actually, the days were like religious ceremonies that the regime couldn't limit people from coming to the streets because it's supposed to be a religious regime, so they couldn't do anything about that. And so people used that opportunity and they came. And so there was so many clashes throughout Tehran that a year later, the regime in its analysis stated that if that had continued for another 6 hours to that extent, we would have been overthrown. So, I mean, it's really, sometimes it's just, as you said, it's a small window of opportunity, but it's really important that the people are supported in those moments. I think that the regime knew that these uprisings are reaching that point, and that's why they have done this crackdown now. And we even had like one of the strategists of this regime just 3 days ago. I think he did a tweet and said, if you think that we're going to restore internet before the Persian New Year, which is March 20th, you're dead wrong, because the minute that we restore, this is going to come, because everyone has this rage right now, because everyone has seen so many dead bodies on the ground in these past weeks, and they're mostly like in their teens or early 20s, and so that is fresh in people's minds. They want to react to it. So the regime knows that if it just lets go a bit on something right now, it's going to fall apart. And it really is in a very critical state, because right now you have to understand the regime. Khamenei used to say that we fight in Syria and Iraq and Lebanon, so we don't have to fight in Shiraz, Isfahan, and Tehran. Well, right now it's not fighting there because Bashar al-Assad has fallen. Hezbollah is, non-existent practically right now in comparison. So it's lost its grip in the region. And that's why now it has to face the crisis inside of the country. So the regime for 40 years has moved forward on two legs. One has been suppression internally, and the other has been the export of terrorism and fundamentalism. Well, that limb has been cut off practically. So it's standing on one foot. And so it is a very weak position, and it's on the verge of falling apart. And the people of Iran know it. The regime knows it. What's important is for the international community to actually recognize that and stop appeasing the regime behind the scenes, behind the closed doors, and actually stand by the people of Iran and let the people of Iran take their destiny into their own hands. Our people have the capability and the capacity to do so. And we have an organized resistance, which is, really in history, you can't find an organization that has dedicated 60 years to the freedom of its people without one day of break here. And I think that in itself is what makes us very strong. to be able to continue and to be able to make this actually succeed.
Well, I hope this opportunity gets seized upon. The last thing I would have you comment on, to see your opinion, or if it's just people like me who are observing it, I find the American left very oddly quiet when it comes to this struggle that the Iranian people are going through. And any other time, college campuses are burning down. But for some reason, when it comes to this struggle, the American left, the media that happens to be left-leaning, the world figures, the Gretas, and all the other people who are, all about sailing across the ocean and providing supposed materials for help, they're nowhere to be found during this crisis. Is that correct? Is that observation correct?
To some extent, it is. Unfortunately, it is also the card that the Iranian regime has played to try to present itself as the country that's standing in face of imperialism and things like that. Even though that's far from the reality. The reality is that also, I see this among even the Iranian youth in different countries. They want to support their people, but on the other hand, they see this foreign interests who are after like returning the Shah or things like that, and that's what sets them off. And but I think one of the things that I've seen actually in the last week in France specifically, and it's been interesting to see it, and I think that it is also catching up in other countries too. It might be with a bit of a delay, but it's getting there. They are making a clarification here. Like, for instance, I saw that in a lot of the television broadcasts, people were doing interviews who are from the left, but they're starting to draw a line. They're like, look, we stand by the people of Iran. So our message now is no to Shah, no to mullahs, yes to the people's sovereignty. And this is also, if you look at the images coming out of the demonstrations in Paris on Saturday, there are huge demonstrations here, and a lot of like French left or other activists, the activists that you see from Palestine and everything else, they were all there too, a lot of them. And you see a lot of these signs. It says, ni Shah, ni mullah, or ni dictator, like no to religious tyranny, no to dictatorship, yes to supporting the people and things like that. So they're aligning that message now, because that's, I think, unfortunately, that's one of the things that's creating a divide instead of creating unity is, the people don't want this revolution to be hijacked again. Yeah. Have that experience. And so that is one of the things that I think is having that effect. In 2022, you saw people from left and right, from us across the political spectrum, coming together in support of the Iranian people. So it's not an issue of not supporting the people of Iran, but when they see foreign interests trying to pursue a specific line that's not, aligned with what the people want, that's where the problem starts. But I think that people are catching up to this issue, that you, in fact, in your silence, that line is being pushed forward more, and the people of Iran who need your support and your solidarity, they're the ones who are left, in the open there. So I think that is something that we are seeing that is changing, that message, especially in the past few days. I've actually witnessed that myself. But I think that instead of trying to, unfortunately, there are some who are trying to use that, like antagonizing people in this regard. I think what is important is actually to draw the parallels and the solidarities and the places that we actually agree with one another, and use that to unify everyone together instead of creating these divisions. So one of the things is like, do you agree that the people of Iran are being oppressed? Do you agree that they need to be able to have their rights? Then stand in solidarity instead of creating these, this distrust and this division by saying that this is what the people of Iran are calling for, or they want to return to this, or they support, Israel or the US. No, this is about the people of Iran. So let's just concentrate on the people of Iran. Don't make it into a, party division or things like that. Really, it's the one historic chance that we have to really be able to create change for a country without actually having to pay a great price, because the people are paying that price. So let's just stand with them in solidarity and just put aside our personal differences or our views, because at the end of the day, I think everyone can agree with one another that the people of Iran deserve democracy and freedom, no matter how you, what your views are, or how you actually, in what category you might fit when it comes to your political leniency. It's important to stand in solidarity right now with Iranians. And I think that positive messaging that Iranians are trying to also give, they're like, yes to a secular democratic republic. Which part of that do you not agree with? So I think a lot of people will agree on that. And that is something that could, solidify everyone and create that solidarity and unity that we need to see.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine. I feel that most Americans are supporting the people of Iran. A secular democratic government is what we're supposed to have here. So we should be supporting that. How can people, we've been talking to Zolal Habibi. How can people find out more about you, find out more about the organization that you're involved with, and how can they support you otherwise?
Well, right now, I think we greatly appreciate any help that anyone can give, be it through social media activism, be it on supporting people on the ground in the protests and rallies and everything that are happening in different cities and countries, reaching out to your lawmakers in this regard and passing on that message, or even, being able to help sponsor support those who are trying to help those inside of Iran on the ground. But to be able to learn more, to learn more about the movement, you could visit ncr-iran.org or Maryam Rajavi for change.com. That is MaryamRajavi, Maryam Rajavi. You could also, if you search my name, you'll probably find me on social media if you would like. But I could also provide, the handles for the movement. If you are in the U.S. and you want to join demonstrations, rallies, whatnot, you could reach out to OIAC. It's OIAC. It's the Organization of Iranian American Communities. And in Europe, you could reach out to iranfreedom.org, and they could put you in contact with the different networks of the diaspora in different countries and cities. For those who are in Europe, on the 7th of February, there's going to be a huge rally in Berlin at 1:30. If you could join in solidarity, that would mean a great deal. There will be tens of thousands of people in attendance to show solidarity with the uprisings in Iran and to honor those who have lost their lives. So we greatly appreciate everyone's help and support in this fight. And we hope that we can host you all in a free Iran very soon.
Well, that would be wonderful. I think we can all agree, most reasonable people can agree, that we all want to live under some type of system, regardless of how you want to define it, that allows for people to live their life the way they choose to live it, within the law and so forth. And I think we all want that. We all deserve that, and we all should have that. So I'm hoping that our governments, all the governments involved around the world, do the right thing to help the Iranian people. And I'm sure that the American people will support that by and large. I think, we have our faults in the United States, but I think for the most part, we all value freedom. That's one of the things that this country does pretty well, despite what the left says. We actually do it pretty well. And we want that for other people as well. I know I want it for you. And Zolal, I want you to know that I wish you the very best. I hope you can keep in touch. And it was so wonderful to talk to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. And thank you for this opportunity. And it was a pleasure to be with you. And we will definitely keep in touch. Thank you.
Yes, please do. You can reach out anytime. My name is Billy Dees. You can find the Billy Dees Podcast anywhere podcasts are found. We have more than a 10-year history on all the major platforms. Real easy to find. You can find me on X, which is the former Twitter, at Billy Dees. Real easy to find on there. That's kind of like my social media home. I believe X is very trending, very real time, and it's a great place for podcasters. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you again very, very soon. I'm Billy Dees and host of the self-titled podcast, The Billy Dees Podcast. We are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast featuring authors and creators talking about their craft, advocates for community issues, and myself and an array of co-hosts discussing current events. There's no partisan ranting and raving going on here, just great content. You can find the Billy Dees Podcast on your favorite platform and on Twitter at Billy Dees. Thank you, and I hope you listen in.